All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Just going to wait a couple minutes and while we get our speakers in line, and then we'll get started.
Hey.
Hey, is that Calvin?
Yeah, it's me.
All
Hey,
right. Perfect. Hey, man. How are you?
I'm good. Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are.
Yeah, we are East Coast, so we are afternoon now. And let me just get Sergey here. I'm just going to go on mute for a sec.
I'm here. Hey, Calvin.
Hey. Good to talk to
Hey.
you.
Likewise. Hey, Eli.
Hey, Sergey. All right. Perfect. So we are good to go.
Yeah, it's pretty smooth. I actually this is I think my first time speaking on a Twitter Spaces, so hopefully it all goes smooth.
Awesome.
But yeah, Sergey, how are you doing?
Doing well. We're pretty busy these days. How are you?
I'm good. Same here. Just yeah, I guess interesting times in the market, obviously, and there's just so much to learn about across all of crypto. So I've been reading a lot, digging into a lot of different projects. I'm excited to dig into Axelar a little bit today. Um, but I guess we can just kick it off. So I guess really quick, I'm Calvin. Um, and I spent 4 years working at Compound as the strategy lead and just left recently. And now I'm a really active crypto investor and really sort of researcher, learner. Um, and I invested in Axelar and have known Sergey for a couple, I think maybe a couple years, 1 or 2 years at this point. And that's me. But Sergey, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So Sergey here. My background is distributed systems cryptography. Worked on various cryptographic protocols in the space before, I guess, cryptocurrency and blockchain was even popular, doing various things. And then worked on the Algorand project, from the ground up, hoping to build that and ship it to the market. And after that, just got really passionate about the next big problem as we kept on seeing it coming up more and more, which is the problem of interoperability. And myself and Yorgos, another founding member of Algorand, we decided to focus on that full time. And since then, it's been pretty amazing ride. And Calvin, you've been a support of us from day one, so really appreciate it for everything.
Yeah, when was day one? When did you start working on this specific problem? When did you sort of go from Algorand to thinking about going between chains?
Yeah, it was about a year and a half ago. So last summer, that's when we really started, and started thinking a little bit from just a research and design perspective um, for a few months, and then went on to raise a seed round and kind of started assembling the team and putting something more formal in place, and kind of been a wild ride from there.
Yeah, so a year and a half ago is basically when DeFi summer started.
Yeah.
So I think like for quite some time, maybe the first 6 months of that year and a half, everybody was kind of focused on Ethereum DeFi. You had just come from Algorand. Did you predict like sort of this explosion of interest in other chains, or did you think you were building for a problem that was like 5 years out or 10 years out, or how, at the time I don't think that many people were investing that much time and research into interop stuff. Maybe I'm wrong. How did you think about it back then?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, the way that we saw it, as we were building Algorand, and on its own, Ethereum definitely would not be able to scale to support the growing demand of the application builders, right? If we want to scale the ecosystem, we have to um, find technologically, robust solutions that can last for years, right? And I think, Ethereum sort of had a head start. Definitely, it's incredibly innovative and kind of brought a lot to the space. But it was clear that I think individual platform couldn't just accomplish everything we'll need, and so we'll see many different ecosystems being built in parallel. I think we saw a lot of funding that went into the space, right, in 2017, 2018, to really build out these alternative scaling solutions to the Ethereum, right? And I think, as we shipped Algorand, a lot of other chains were shipping their stacks in parallel, right? And so ultimately, if you take that and then predict, well, what's going to happen 2 years from the moment these blockchains launch, well, assuming you see, investor activity and DeFi activity and technical interest from the communities, then you naturally expect to see more activity on those chains. And so, questions of interoperability start coming up. So I would say it was definitely a bet, right, that we're going to be in a multi-chain future, but at least, technical and business-wise, it just made sense to kind of place that bet on.
Yeah, it happened very, very quickly, or at least, multi-chain sort of got so big so fast. That's something that people cared about, which is really, really interesting. And I guess just like what I've been hearing, talking to founders on other chains, especially some of the cheaper chains like Solana, Avalanche, is that they're different users than Ethereum users.
Yeah.
Obviously, because there are people who have like hundreds of dollars or even tens of dollars. And like, I think a lot of Avalanche users, for example, have never used any other chain, like have never used Ethereum. So it's really interesting to think about, obviously, building like a network that connects all these users together into one kind of larger ecosystem, connecting all these different systems together.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting, right? As you said, as an ecosystem is being built, I think it has its own flavor, right? And it has its own profile. It has its own use cases that it kind of optimizes for, and it's really interesting in seeing all of them being developed in parallel. But I think if we connect them together, I think the ecosystem is just going to scale exponentially. So that's going to be super exciting.
Awesome. Well, what I guess how would you this is kind of a big question, but what is Axelar? How would you kind of describe it at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, Axelar is a kind of universal decentralized interoperability network that was designed to connect autonomous ecosystems with as little effort as possible, right? So, and at the end of it, it really consists of a couple of layers. There's a network layer that can be used to connect these ecosystems in an easy way, and there is a layer of protocols and application SDKs on top of it, right? And that's what allows people to build kind of cross-chain enabled applications on top of the Axelar network, leveraging its protocols and leveraging its infrastructure underneath. So it's the sort of the combination of both that makes it tick.
Gotcha. So to dig into that a little bit, it sounds like kind of the network layer is its own network of validators, right?
Yep.
And sort of a consensus mechanism. And then on top of that are tools to basically allow developers to integrate easily with this network. So for example, you might build some SDK or a protocol that makes asset transfer easy, or even exchange or something like that. Does that sound right?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yep.
So I was curious a little bit about the network and the validators and the consensus there. So I guess how is that network being developed? Like, how many validators do you have? Do you plan to have when you start to launch? And then what does the future state look like? Is this is this a network that will always have 100 validators, like a Polygon or a Solana, or is it? Do you imagine kind of adding more and more validators, making it easier and easier to be a validator?
Yeah, and it's a great question. So the network itself, our starting point was the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint consensus. So the interoperability protocols and the network was designed around it to solve, our interoperability use case in mind. So anybody can join, become a validator and participate in the network, right? And then there's a question of, well, how many of the validators are actually like picked in order to produce blocks? I think originally maybe we'll start with something like 50 validators plus or minus on the main network, and then continue scaling from there. You can easily kind of open that up to hundreds of validators, as other kind of Cosmos chains have done. And I think there's various ways to kind of scale it using more advanced cryptography like BLS signatures and so on and so forth to really open up into, get us to 1,000 plus validators. And I think so definitely that's the goal, to continue increasing and expanding the validator set. But that being said, I think while a lot of people focus on like the number of validators, I think the stake distribution across the validators is also incredibly important, right? Even if you have hundreds of validators or thousands of validators, in most of the networks you see serve the top 10 or the top 15 or top 20 that can collectively authorize any decision. So I think it's it's important to focus on that as well, and making sure that delegations are being done kind of across the broad range of validators, and really not concentrate the voting power, because otherwise the number of validators, it's good to have many, but then they become almost for redundancy reasons other than security. And
Right.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Have you do you have any plans to kind of solve that, like crypto economic plans, or have you seen it solved well anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still learning how to do this as an ecosystem in general. I think our plans so far have been to really work with our validator community, which has been amazing, and helping us like through the test networks and kind of transitioning subsequently, and really, advocate for them, right? Ask our users, our broader community, to delegate fairly across the validators. So we'll be doing work to promote, I think, smaller validators from our side on our channels, give them the tools and visibility that's needed, to get these sort of delegations from the community. At the end of the day, kind of how does these validators get voting power is that the community delegates to them, right? And so that's how they accumulate the voting power. And from our perspective, I think right now, at least, it's going to be focused on education, visibility of these smaller validators that don't necessarily get large fraction of delegations to them in the early days.
Yeah, I it's really interesting to think about. I got one like sort of side question I have is I guess like, so when I worked at Compound, we were building like a protocol, a set of smart contracts on a chain, and then a project like Axelar, it seems like you have so many more layers and sets of problems to deal with, like setting up a validator network and obviously building the logic of the chain and designing a consensus mechanism and stuff. Is there any like single technical aspect that was the biggest challenge?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think for us, so we worked with various multiparty protocols that are needed in order to execute our consensus and authorize kind of requests on other chains, including like threshold cryptography, including various other kind of multi-party signing protocols, even like multisigs and things like that. And I think what you realize is that for these cryptographic protocols, while they're all kind of pretty much solved in academia on paper, right? Actually, taking those algorithms, no matter how simple they are, and building a system around them that's open and permissionless, that's not something anybody has done before, really, right? It's really challenging, like allowing people to come in and out of those validating sets and participate in the kind of multi-party protocols. Even if you look at whatever basic multisigs, forget about like threshold cryptography. It's like you have to deal with it. You have to understand when a validator can join, when a validator can leave. How do you rotate the the keys across the system. The threshold cryptography comes with additional complexity where you need broadcast channels across the validators, you need secure channels and things like that. So it's, yeah, and I think it's really has been around, taking simple algorithms on paper and building a scalable system around them. And that's not a trivial task, but I think we as a team kind of enjoy that fully.
Yeah, that's that reminds me. We used to have like offsites where we read research, and I remember reading like a bunch of academic cryptography papers, and it does seem like everything is almost solved on paper. Like these threshold BLS, not almost solved, but like there are these really amazing designs on paper and through research, but nobody has implemented them for years.
Yeah.
And then I guess like even once they're implemented, it takes years to perfect them or make sure that they're actually secure in practice. I guess the sort of pace of cryptography research and then implementation is, well, it's quite slow compared to what you might expect in like the tech startup world where things move super, super quickly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the reasons is that the consequences are pretty brutal, right? If you make a mistake there. So, if you, whatever, rolling out new cryptography, I think like, so for instance, like BLS, right? BLS signatures, like we've known for 20 years how to build them. Like we know amazing advantages that you will have once we have them, but even agreeing on, a set of standards, which we're now working on, and figuring out all the engineering challenges to make sure it's actually remains secure. It's incredibly, challenging, but, with the challenge comes the opportunity and the rewards, right, that you get once you actually solve it. So that's exciting.
Yeah, you can really not just build a really useful and novel, really, really useful and novel network, but you can kind of like leave your mark in the history of cryptography as well. So I mean, to I guess get a little bit more into the implementation details of Axelar. So as far as I understand, you're sort of you plan to launch with support for, actually, can you tell me what chains you plan to launch support?
So I think initial rollout will include support for various kind of Cosmos chains through like an ABC stack, and then various EVM chains. We also have a module to work with proof of work chains like Bitcoin. I think we're going to have to sequence our launch strategy and rollout as we see the demand and use cases. But those will be the initial supports. But I think one thing to emphasize is that what we've done with the network is really making it kind of composable, right? Exposing all these components that we're using as building blocks, so that suppose like we have a module to integrate with chain X, right? And then you can actually come in and like modify and run like a few commands to integrate with other chains with pretty much no effort, right? And I think we've spent a lot of time really designing the system in such a way. To give you an example, like it took us, I think, 15 minutes just to onboard an arbitrary like EVM chains through the stack, right? Where you just run the sequence of commands, and assuming the validators are supporting that chain also with their, voting on the events from it, then you have integration that's enabled by the platform. So that's incredibly powerful, and I think we're gonna continue optimizing where making these connections is a matter of hours or even minutes, as opposed to kind of a months, as many other kind of platform solutions have.
It might be too early to say, but do you foresee kind of the Axelar team or foundation, or however you're structured, building out these modules, or at some point, any arbitrary chain, do you imagine like the developers from that chain would build out their own module on top of the Axelar network?
Both. I mean, I think initially we're rolling out the network in some of these modules, but at the end of the day, it is a permissionless proof of stake network, right? So you can come in, you can write a module, you can propose a governance upgrade, and we can integrate that on the network. And we have requests, and we have teams that are exploring that as well, just building their own modules for the chains. It will be a joint effort, and I think that's what really makes this platform powerful, where it's not, you don't have to ask us for permission, right? Like, you can go and do this thing yourself. The network is going to be open. The code, is already open. You can create pull requests, and we have various community members that have been contributing and helping us build this along the way.
Gotcha. Yeah, really, really, really cool. And then actually, I see Dimitri's here, who a couple of months ago published this really great research paper on a bunch of different interoperability and bridge solutions. And there's one specific characteristic that he called statefulness, which is basically just about like what kind of information and how complex information can be transferred across chain by these different solutions, including Axelar. And so I think one of the biggest, like today, there's a lot of bridges that are deployed and that are working. And I think like they're quite basic. I've heard you describe them as banks elsewhere. Like they're basically like these centralized entities, almost like not that different than using like a centralized exchange as a bridge between chains, except that you don't have to do any KYC probably. But so my question is like, what's possible to transfer across the Axelar network besides just sort of type of asset and amount of that asset and chain from and chain to?
Yeah. Hey, Dmitry, by the way, yeah, great article I think you wrote. I think the information that we want to transfer is really not limited to any specific type, right? And I think you can think of kind of the network having multiple components. There is just a basic message passing component, and then there are interoperability protocols that could sit on top of it, right? For message passing, it's, you give me a payload, right? Let's use the Axelar network and the infrastructure to deliver this payload from chain A to chain B. And then you can imagine this payload be, a transaction that calls a smart contract on a different chain. Or you can imagine this payload, being used to mint an asset, right, from one chain to another, or transfer NFT or perform arbitrary types of requests. And so kind of the way we're rolling out, I think, there are some use cases that we're targeting in the early days, especially around asset transfers. But really, the goal is to allow people to use the infrastructure in the network to build other types of protocols on top of it, right? Whether or not it's interoperability protocol or asset transfer protocol or really anything else you want. And you can use the underlying network and say, here's a gateway, here's a payload. I'm going to send my payload to this gateway, and the Axelar infrastructure in the network will just deliver it to some other chain where a destination contract is called that may execute some logic there, right? And so that's really the goal, that kind of allow people to do whatever they do, which is like build things that make their use cases tick and go cross chain.
So when you say like a protocol on top of Axelar, is that could I think of that as like a smart contract on the Axelar network?
Yeah, so great question. So not necessarily, right? You can there are two ways you can leverage, I think. Leverage, use case number one is where, suppose you transfer information from two ecosystems that speak the same language, for instance, right? So there's EVM chain like Ethereum, and there's another EVM chain like Avalanche. And in that case, you can construct a message on the sender chain that only needs to be kind of relayed and executed on the destination chain, right? And in that case, your protocol will sit as a layer of contracts on the sender and destination chain that would interact with Axelar gateway contracts, right? And then you would use the Axelar gateway contracts almost like routers, right? Where you can, put information, they will deliver it, like finalized somewhere else, and you have guarantees that this information will actually be, relayed along the way. There are other, use cases where you actually need a translation layer when you go from one type of ecosystem to another. So, for instance, if you go in from a Cosmos ecosystem, which has its own consensus and not necessarily smart contracts on chain, and you want to go to an EVM ecosystem, which is Solidity based, you actually need to translate these requests, right? And so in that case, you can write a modular or later down the line, maybe kind of write a smart contract on Axelar to do this translation for you, but also use it as a routing and delivery layer, right? So you have a message coming from Cosmos. This message is not natively perhaps understood by another ecosystem. So you can, build your translation layer or encode your packets in a certain format, and then leverage the Axelar network to translate it for you on the fly and deliver at the same time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So these sort of the processing required of the network gets pretty complex, like everything from asset transfer to these translations. Are you able to kind of like decompose that for the validator network so that a single validator could handle any type of, transaction that's requested of them to handle?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think one thing that we try to do with the network is make a lot of the functionalities like opt-in for the validators, right? So there are various building blocks like running, multi-party like sign-in protocols, voting on events on external chains, or running the bare bone like consensus mechanism and these translation queries. And as a validator, you can participate in a variety of these components essentially. And we incentivize initially at least to participate in as many as possible. But as a validator, you get to decide like I want to vote on events from Avalanche or Ethereum, so I'm going to opt in and I'm going to vote on those events. But I don't want to I don't have resources to vote on events from whatever Polygon or some other network, so I'm not going to register for it. And so effectively, what we're trying to do is design a system that can horizontally scale, okay, as we get more demand, so that as we add more validators, maybe we tweak the parameters and loosen them up a little bit more, but we still have enough of the validators that kind of opt in to do certain functions that are collectively then sufficient to perform these interoperability requests.
Oh, that's really interesting. So yeah, I had a major question about basically part of your thesis of the importance of things like Axelar is that any single blockchain will eventually run into a scaling limit. And you're kind of saying, and my question was like, why wouldn't Axelar run into the same limit if it's supporting like 1 million blockchains? But you're actually saying that in a sense, you're going to have like many validator groups, basically. In a sense, you're kind of sharding your validator set to support different networks in different ways.
Yeah, there are multiple ways, to go about this from our perspective. One is, kind of a horizontal scaling across, the validators and, isolating some of the functionalities. You can similarly just take, and spin up another instance of kind of a Axelar network, right? That perhaps you want to dedicate towards specific types of requests and specific like ecosystems. And then because all of these things are composable, these kind of two, let's say like instances of Axelar network can talk to each other, right? And then you still have the composability that way. So you can, there are multiple ways of scaling it. I do think both horizontal and vertical scaling factors are important, and I think we'll have to, as an ecosystem overall, execute on both dimensions. Horizontal scaling is easier because you can replicate the stacks, but then that comes with these interoperability challenges that you have to solve, right? But it's kind of inevitable that we're going to need it if we continue growing the ecosystem, just because just like in Web 2, we have databases and networks that power individual applications and like consume all the throughput of them and all the transaction volume that they can support. I think we're going to see more of those instances in the blockchain space. Well, I hope so. Otherwise, what are we doing?
So what's the launch plan? Can you tell us a little bit about when you plan to launch, what you plan to launch with, kind of what we can expect to see out of Axelar as it becomes more and more public and publicly accessible?
Yeah, for sure. I've been writing a testnet, I think, for the last like 6 months with various validators, ecosystem players. We've recently completed, 3 audits on the network and like various kind of components of it. And the initial rollout would consist with really spinning up the validator sets and this decentralized network, onboarding like ecosystem partners, supporting these initial integrations that we talked about, and initial asset transfers and use cases, right? And so we actually have some exciting news that will be coming up in the next week or so. So kind of encourage everybody to be on the lookout for those. And from there, we're going to continue, enabling more features on the network. We're still doing some audits of other components in parallel, and so those are going to be kind of turned on as we're rolling out the network gradually.
You should leak the news right here. No, I'm just kidding. We can wait. It's only a week. I guess so when you launch, obviously you have kind of two sets of users. One is developers and one is degens, basically. Well, I say that respectfully as a degen. And who do you kind of like need to get on board first? Like as a degen, will I be able to use the network for much at first, or do I need developers to start building things on top of Axelar that face me? Like, do I interact with Axelar directly, or do I need to wait for an application ecosystem to get built around it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we'll have both players that will have a place from day one, essentially, in the ecosystem. For retail users, right, and folks that participate in DeFi and trading, will have some applications that will be rolled out that will allow them to move their assets across these ecosystems. So you can think of sample applications being built on top of Axelar and on top of its SDK layer. So as a user, you'll be able to interact with easy front ends. We have some partners that are integrating similar types of bridging applications in their front ends. So that would be pretty exciting as well.
Yeah.
And then we have the builders that are actually doing this, and again, like integrating on top of the SDK and on top of the stack. That would maybe it'll take a little bit longer for them to roll out, but will be super powerful as well. Our philosophy from day one has been to work closely with application builders and build sample applications ourselves, so we can learn how the network behaves, how to optimize it, what are the pain points that would be while working with the stack. And so that allows us to have this almost like full stack approach to the initial rollout that I think is going to be super powerful.
Yeah, I can't wait. Honestly, at this point, I think I have assets on probably like 6 to 8 different chains, or L2s, or whatever you want to call them. And it's like, so I've gone through every different type of bridging experience. And it's so painful. Like it takes, it can take hours to get like any amount of assets onto whatever chain, and then it's hard to get them back, and like maybe you don't have the native fee token there when you get there. So to be able to like kind of have a general solution to that would just be amazing. And I know that's just the beginning of kind of the story of Axelar, like kind of a first problem that it can solve that people are facing today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope that a year or a couple of years from now, we don't work with bridges directly, right? Maybe there will be a place for them for like market making or moving liquidity here and there. But I really hope that for the users, we simplify the experience where they can just interact with different applications and assets across the ecosystem without going through the bridge and front ends and all that. And I think that's what really is going to empower the ecosystem. If you have to imagine like on the internet, like you wanted to send an email, right? Or and then you had to like go through multiple front ends to send an email from one email to another until it gets to destination, right? Like that's we don't do that. Like we have protocols and stacks underneath it that automate all those processes. And I think we have to get to a similar point in the blockchain space.
Yeah, heck yeah. There's a long way to go, both the work, which will take time, but obviously I think you and I are both here for kind of a multi-decade trend with blockchain and crypto taking over technology. So it's going to be exciting. I know we had talked about this being about 30 minutes, so I don't want to go too far over, I guess. Is there any kind of last things you would want to tell the community, like especially how they can keep paying attention to what you're doing or even start to get involved or contribute?
Yeah, for sure. I think the best place to get started is just to go to our website, axelar.network. We have links to Discord, which is pretty vibrant, and we have all kinds of community members on it, from developers to ecosystem folks that are contributing various types of content, documentation on the network, kind of graphics, tutorials, and so on and so forth. And so Discord, Telegram, Twitter, all the handles are available from our website, and start getting engaged. I think we're growing as a community. I think we're going to be bridging and connecting all these different ecosystems, and I think as a journey it's incredibly rewarding. So anybody that's looking for doing something exciting, just get in touch and we'll find a way.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sergey. Eli, you have anything you want to close out with?
No, I think you guys did a great job, and Sergey covered our kind of closing items, so I think I'm all good.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Calvin. Okay. I think this was super fun.
Yeah, keep doing great work. I'm excited to follow and to be a user.
Thanks. See you.
All right, take care.